What are your thoughts on the pros complaining about scheduling? Oof, this is like a whole topic actually. Maybe while I download the demo, I can just mention it. It's like 5 minutes. So, I think Chad wrote some tweets about he's very much on the side of the events exist. The events exist, and it's up to the players to say no. And I think before I talk about the other nuance and stuff, I think that's a really important point, that this ultimately is events are being run, and that might do some damage to the scene and cause some problems and stuff. But it is on the players if they want to go to these events. Now, from there, I think Chad is missing a bit of nuance when it comes to like, how easy is that, or is that really like realistic? Even though it's possible and should happen, is it realistic? And I think you see some of the other arguments that have come out where it's like, okay, as a player, you don't want to say no to a tournament because the whole point of a tournament is to be important. So if ESL are going to run a tournament in a calendar, then they're going to say, if you do this well at this event, then you can go to our next event, on the ESL Pro Tour, or you win, this much money if you play at this tournament, or whatever. The incentives are there. Otherwise, the tournament wouldn't be running if there weren't reasons to play. So the argument to say you can just pick whatever tournaments you go to is a little bit rough, just because you're kind of, you're waving a carrot in the player's face, and then there's pressure from themselves to play and for their fans on them. Like, there was a time where Astralis got shamed for skipping events. We don't really talk about that, but that actually happened. But it turns out that that's what you're supposed to do. Oversaturation has been an issue for a long time, but I think that it is really true that ultimately this comes back to the players eventually. But for right now, in terms of who can control what easily, there is the idea that, okay, if you run a really packed schedule with an event every weekend, what are the negatives? In my opinion, this is an ethics problem and a sustainability problem. I think a lot of us can feel that there's probably going to be, a couple more players get burned out, maybe a couple retirements in the near future, just as a natural cycle of players' careers, and then the amount of CS that's happening right now, because this schedule is more packed than any other, and so on. And certain teams get an advantage because they're willing to grind a lot more because they haven't put in that much time yet, and they don't even know LAN, and they're really seeing a lot of success. So they have an advantage in a situation like this, where this is their zone. Every game feels super important. Plus, they've done this a million times, and they have much more stamina than some of the tier 1 teams in the tier 2 as you're grinding up. Everyone says playing in the tier 1 is easier because everyone's trying to play more perfect. Plus, you're more familiar. Plus, there's less games at the tier 1. Yeah, if there's tournaments every weekend. In my opinion, this is my feeling. If there's a best of 5 every weekend, then best of 5s mean less every single time they're played, and you can just skip one and wait till the next one. Another small thing for me is that I miss a time when you could talk about CS with your friend, and you could literally talk almost to the round, and you would expect your friend to have watched it. But now, people are really CS on the second monitor, tune in every once in a while, maybe catch the last map of a grand final that happens once a week. And it's way more about, macro stuff, statistics, how many times in the head-to-head have they won, and then a couple of like stream highlights and clutch rounds and stuff that make it to Reddit that everyone gets to see, like KDN's 1v4. And then that's, and that in some ways will always be what sports and CS and stuff will come down to. So that's fine. But for me personally, I'm envious of something that looks like a closed circuit. Of course, if I say I want a closed circuit, that wouldn't benefit me because I work at Blast. So if ESL are the company to do the closed circuit, then every other event is excluded. Also, I think that while Valve don't want to step in, I think they've made it pretty clear they don't want one company to be a deity. any one company and run run the entire thing. So I think they're always going to allow for some kind of competition. So this is not something that we're actually going to, probably see in the future. And so in that from that perspective, if you look at the ESL events, it's like, okay, the other argument is Chad said that there's like a lot of viewership on the games, and that's true. People are watching. And I personally think that the viewership is going to get a lot higher in the future, but because of the amount of people that are playing, Counter-Strike has almost doubled since last year. The numbers are just insane. But people don't know. I think people don't actually know those players. They don't know who those players are. Like people at pundits, pros, people who are on HLTV and having those conversations. A lot of those viewers and players that are new are just kind of getting in now. They're learning some mechanics. They're like playing the game. Eventually, there'll be commenters, viewers, new analysts, new commentators, new players in like the end of the year. That's what I think. And right now, it doesn't feel like the scene is growing, but it has tremendously, whether we know it or not. And I think in a year or two or whatever, it's going to grow a lot. But I think the viewership could potentially be even higher if, maybe we had like a, really healthy schedule and everything. And I guess when you're new, you want to watch everything. So maybe it is the way forward to just keep going how it is. But yeah, I think the desensitization of too many games and not enough emphasis on any one is tough. And I just kind of wonder who it benefits the most to have so many tournaments going on. What's ESL's incentive to run, to take up so much of the playing days and even more each year. But if they're making the profit off of the events and it works, and then players play in them and people watch them, then of course it makes sense to keep them going. But when it comes to ethics and sustainability, if it becomes a situation where secretly players are getting really, really stressed out, and we only see the tweets and stuff and the thoughts that bubble up to the top, but this might be a really, really big problem that hasn't shown its full face until a year from now, and it might affect how many people, end up actually leaving the game permanently, or how many people stop watching permanently who have been lifetime fans or something like that. Just, again, the desensitization or just the overworking or whatever. If that has an effect, then that should be taken seriously, but it's hard to gauge that. And I kind of feel like the viewership is really good because the game's actually doing very well. But I don't think we know, how many important people we're losing that have been around for a long time, potentially because of the burnout, I guess, or whatever. So I don't know if I'm right, though. I mean, I think there's too much CS, but I don't know if I'm right. But if you ask the players right now, most of them say they don't want this much. They want to be able to have a break. And this is where it comes back to them in terms of their, responsibility. The CSPPA is not an organization I understand or believe in ever since they, didn't say shit about ESL and the Pro League spots and that whole situation, but like want to speak up on something completely random. Like they just really rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't really know if I trust them, and I've heard stuff about them behind the scenes, lots of stuff, to be honest, that didn't really give me a good impression. But something like that is where they would be important. Like if they're going to be important, it should be now, because the players should ask for, let's say, for example, they get 2 weeks of a break for the player break, but there's a tournament the day after the player break ends. So they have to go on vacation for a week, and then what? They got to practice again because they got a 750K tournament the day after they get back from their break. So their player break is actually only 1 week now, or no weeks if they want to practice for 2 weeks. So what they need is a month, right? What they need is to take a month off and then go, travel for 3 weeks. That's enough of a break, and then come back and practice on the last week if they want to. But that's not on the tournaments to push back their schedule just to give the players an extra break. Because if, let's say, one event pushes the tournament just to give the players an extra break, then any other tournament can come in right in between that and put up $100,000 for them to play in that event, Snow Sweet Snow or whatever. So that's where it is on the players and for them to organize. And we should want them to organize so that even us as viewers or whatever, we also get the break, or we also, like, it affects everybody. So, but it's up to them, because they might feel pressure to enter these tournaments, but if the tournaments had rules for when they could make them, then they should be comfortable within those rules to like go and join these tournaments or whatever it is. And so I think that they need something like a CSPPA where they can get organized and yeah. And I mean, if the CSPPA is real and actually doing good things, then this is something they should jump on. But again, I don't really have faith that they've really organized well for stuff like this, but who knows? We'll see if that becomes something. Selfishly, I want an off season. I want a situation where we have a mental break. We can talk about roster moves. We can go into a season, absorb it all, hopefully, and then big break, shuffle up. Like, yeah, I would love that. And that's similar to a closed circuit and takes a lot of cooperation. But I think that starts with the players and organizing so that they have enough space to breathe. And players just have to convince whatever their orgs, and then the TOs just have no choice but to respect those boundaries. And then boom, we have a situation where everything works. I mean, ultimately, yeah, I think players are just when you think about it, and you might think, why don't they just do it? Well, if you're the player, when you're criticizing the player, it's super easy, why don't they kick this player? Why don't they do this? But like, you never think, oh, what's it like to be on that team, and think, man, I want to kick my teammate. How do I have that conversation? That's actually way harder than going from the outside and saying, this guy has really bad stats, he needs to go, and it's obvious. And for the players on the team, they got personal relationships there, they got baggage, they have their boss they have to worry about, they don't know what the answer will be from their team, they got to worry about the next player they get. I mean, these are really hard decisions, no matter how obvious it looks from the outside. And when it comes to something like organizing to make a change in the scene this drastic, you have to take time out of your day when you're practicing, playing, sleeping, thinking about CS, stressed out about matches. Then you have your partners, and you're talking to your parents, and any time you spend with your friends, whatever. And then you've got to now organize other players who are all on different schedules, and have their own stresses and own very packed schedules, and then try to get this done. And that's hard. It needs to happen, but it's hard to get organized. And I think it's important to be sympathetic about that, because we're in the Wild West, and and then the great part about CS, of course, is we've all done this ourselves the whole way through, and things are more corporate now. But in some ways, we've just all worked together to kind of build this stuff, and Valve hasn't put in the structure and whatever, and that's why we can survive when things go away, or like 2020, we just we killed it all 2020 with the events and everything. That also means it's just going to be harder, and it takes time to make changes like this. But yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about the whole situation. I'm kind of glad to talk about it. My thought is that it is harming the scene to have so much calendar space taken in general, despite how it's distributed. And I hate the best of 5 finals every week. That's just personal. I want an off season. That's just personal. And I have a feeling that it is doing really big damage slowly to our scene. But I don't know for sure. So I can't really be like, we need to take action. I agree with Chad that it comes down to, players need to be accountable for that kind of thing. And they're spending some energy tweeting about this stuff. So hopefully it does actually cause some change, and they spend less energy on the tweets and actually doing something about it. Those are my thoughts. Does that make sense? Did I overreach there? Is that good?